The morning sun had barely stretched its golden fingers across the small town of Willow Creek, yet Lila was already at her post, kneading dough with a rhythm born of routine and necessity. The scent of flour and sugar hung heavy in the tiny bakery, mingling with the faint aroma of warm bread and pastries that had just come out of the oven. Lila wiped a streak of flour from her forehead, glancing around her modest little shop. The walls were painted a cheerful shade of buttercream, but the corners told a different story. Peeling paint, a small leak in the ceiling from last week's rain, and a few chipped tiles that had long since surrendered to time. Her bakery, the Golden Crust, had been her dream ever since she was a little girl, helping her mother knead dough in the cramped kitchen of their family home. But dreams, she had quickly learned, were easier to imagine than to sustain. Every day she poured her energy into baking, setting out fresh loaves of bread, muffins, and croissants, all carefully arranged to tempt the early morning customers. Yet the money rarely seemed to add up. Flour was expensive, sugar even more so, and the small rent she paid every month felt like a mountain to climb. Still, she persisted, because giving up had never been in her nature. Lila's mornings always started before sunrise. She would walk through the narrow streets of Willow Creek, the cobblestones still wet with dew, past closed shutters and silent houses, carrying her basket of fresh bread. The townsfolk knew her by now. She had a reputation for kindness as well as skill. There was Mr. Harper, the retired schoolteacher, who always bought a loaf of rye bread, even though he could barely pay for it. Lila would slip in an extra slice, saying, "For your morning tea, Mr. Harper." And there was little Emily, whose family was struggling after her father had lost his job. Lila often set aside a small muffin or bun for Emily, hiding it beneath the counter so the girl could enjoy a sweet treat without shame or embarrassment. This generosity came not from wealth, she had none, but from something far rarer, a heart that believed in kindness even when it could not be repaid. It was this quiet honesty, this insistence on doing the right thing, that made her beloved in Willow Creek. People often said she could brighten the gloomiest day with just a smile, and she liked to believe that the world needed a little more warmth than it usually received. Despite her cheerful demeanor, Lila carried the weight of worry on her slender shoulders. Bills piled up, suppliers were impatient, and sometimes when the day ended and the shop was locked, she would sit alone on the small stool behind the counter and wonder if she would ever escape the endless cycle of struggle. She had dreams, bigger than the cramped bakery, but they seemed as distant as the horizon, teasing her with possibility, yet always just out of reach. That morning, like many others, began with a familiar rhythm. The oven hummed steadily as she kneaded dough, her fingers moving with practice ease. The bell above the door jingled, announcing the arrival of her first customer. A man, weary from the night shift, shuffled in, eyes still half closed. "1 loaf of sourdough, please," he mumbled. Lila smiled, wrapping the bread carefully in brown paper. "Extra slice for you," she said, handing him a small piece tucked into the corner. His eyes widened in surprise. "You didn't have to," he said, but she just smiled, waving him away. As the morning passed, a trickle of customers came and went, each greeted with her warm smile and gentle words. She remembered to check on Mr. Harper and set aside a few buns for Emily, as always. It was exhausting work, physically and emotionally, but Lila found joy in these small moments. The grateful nods, the shy smiles, the brief conversations that reminded her she was not alone in the world. Yet even in these moments of contentment, a nagging anxiety lingered. The rent was due in 3 days, and her small savings wouldn't cover it. The bakery needed a new oven, one that could bake more efficiently and allow her to expand her offerings, but every quote she received made her stomach twist. She felt the sting of fear that whispered in the quiet moments. Maybe this dream is too big. Maybe you aren't enough. She shook her head, kneading the dough with renewed determination. She refused to let fear dictate her life. Not today. It was during this morning of routine and quiet struggle that the first hint of something extraordinary crept into Lila's life. The air outside the bakery had shifted. A storm had rolled in overnight, leaving the streets slick and the sky a deep shade of gray. The wind whispered through the alleys, carrying with it the scent of rain and distant promises. Lila didn't notice it immediately. She was too busy arranging trays of golden pastries, each one a tiny triumph of effort and hope. But something tugged at her attention, a subtle sense that today, the world might hold more than ordinary challenges. Her phone buzzed briefly on the counter, a message from her supplier reminding her that the flour payment was overdue. She sighed, her shoulders tightening under the weight of worry. She had no immediate solution, no magic to make the money appear. And yet, as she wiped her hands on her apron, she felt a strange flutter of anticipation, as though the storm outside had stirred not just the air, but her life itself. It was in that precise moment that a small boy ran past the bakery, chasing a paper boat down the flooded street.
He slipped and fell, his toy drifting away in the current. Without thinking, Lila rushed to help him, scooping him up and retrieving the little boat. The boy's eyes shone with gratitude, and his mother, who had followed closely behind, gave Lila a relieved smile. These were the moments that reminded her why she continued, why she persisted despite the exhaustion and fear. She could make a difference, even in tiny, seemingly insignificant ways. And it was this combination of diligence, kindness, and heart that set her apart. In a town filled with ordinary routines, Lila's small acts of generosity created ripples that touched more lives than she could ever see. The bakery, for all its flaws and challenges, was more than just a shop. It was a hub of warmth, a place where honesty and compassion were baked into every loaf, every pastry, every humble gesture.
By the time the first hour of the morning had passed, the storm outside intensified. Raindrops pelted the windows, creating tiny rivers that ran down the glass, and the wind howled through the streets like a restless spirit. Most townsfolk hurried home, seeking warmth and shelter, but Lila continued her work with steadfast focus. Little did she know, this storm, both literal and metaphorical, was about to change her life in ways she had never imagined. For now, she was just Lila, the young baker with flour on her hands and hope in her heart. But the universe had a peculiar way of rewarding honesty, kindness, and courage, and it was about to set in motion a chain of events that would test her character, challenge her resilience, and ultimately transform her life forever. And so, the stage was set. In the first 2 minutes, the audience sees her struggle, her heart, and her relentless spirit, hooking them with the promise that something extraordinary is about to unfold. Who knew that a small act of integrity in a humble bakery could lead to encounters that would reshape destiny itself? The rain came suddenly, as if the sky had decided to pour out all its anger at once. Lila adjusted the scarf around her neck, pressing her shawl tighter against her small frame. The streets of Willow Creek, already slick from the early morning drizzle, had become rivers of water reflecting the flickering lamplights and the dull gray of the stormy sky. She clutched her basket tightly, the last few loaves of bread swaying precariously, and hurried down the narrow streets, each step splashing in the puddles. Her shoes were soaked, her hair damp, but she welcomed the rain as another small challenge to be overcome. She was used to struggle. It had been her companion for as long as she could remember. The market had been chaotic that day, more crowded than usual despite the weather. People moved quickly, clutching umbrellas and rushing to complete errands before the storm worsened. Lila had finished her final deliveries, paying her suppliers with the last of her savings, and now all she wanted was the warmth of her small home and the comfort of dry clothes. She paused briefly at the corner of Maple Street, balancing her basket as a gust of wind threatened to topple it. The smell of wet earth mixed with the aroma of bread made her stomach growl, though she pushed the thought aside. There was little time for herself. She always put others first. As she turned into an alley that offered a shortcut home, something unusual caught her eye. At first, she thought it was a discarded bag or a bundle of trash swept in by the storm. But as she stepped closer, the shape became unmistakable. A sleek black briefcase lay abandoned on the wet cobblestones, rain sliding off its smooth surface in small rivulets. It looked almost pristine despite the downpour, as if it had been dropped only moments before. The metallic clasp glinted under the dim streetlight, and for a moment, Lila hesitated. Her heart beat faster, a mixture of curiosity and caution urging her to stop. She knelt beside it, her fingers brushing the wet surface. The briefcase was heavy, far heavier than she expected. It seemed solid and substantial, the kind of item that clearly did not belong to a passerby. Her mind raced. Whose could it be? Why was it left here, alone in the storm? The alley was narrow and empty, the buildings on either side looming like silent witnesses. Every instinct in her body warned caution, yet another part of her could not resist the pull of curiosity. With a deep breath, she unlatched the briefcase. The clasp opened smoothly, revealing its contents. Lila froze. Inside lay stacks of neatly organized documents, a few envelopes stuffed with crisp banknotes, and a small pouch of gold coins. A business card rested on top, bearing the name Alexander Sterling, and a corporate logo she faintly recognized from the newspapers. She could feel her pulse in her throat, her mind whirling with possibilities and consequences. This was not just a lost briefcase. It was a treasure trove of wealth and responsibility. Lila's first thought was panic. She could take it. Surely no one would know. It was wet and deserted, the perfect opportunity to solve her immediate problems. Rent, groceries, bills, everything she had been worrying about for weeks. But almost immediately, guilt pricked her conscience. She knew the value of honesty, the weight of integrity that had been instilled in her since childhood. Her mother had always said,
"Lila, the world will test you, but what you do in those moments defines who you are." The memory of her mother's words made her stomach tighten. Could she betray that trust, even in desperation? The storm intensified. Raindrops hammered the alley, drumming a frantic rhythm that matched the pounding of her heart. She glanced around. The streets were empty, shadows flickering under the lamplight. The briefcase seemed to hum with importance, a silent challenge to her character. She placed her hand over the contents again, imagining the headlines if someone else found it, or worse, if she kept it and it was discovered. The consequences were serious, unimaginable, yet the allure of immediate relief tugged at her stubborn mind. Lila stood up, brushing the rain from her clothes, her decision forming steadily in her heart. She could not keep this. Whatever this briefcase contained, it belonged to someone who had worked hard, someone who might be frantic and desperate right now searching for it. And she knew that she could not in good conscience add to their suffering. She tightened her grip on the briefcase, her hands slick with rain, and resolved to return it. But as she began to walk, a thought struck her. How could she find the owner in a city this size? She had no way to contact Alexander Sterling directly. All she had was a name, a card, and the hope that honesty would guide her in the right direction. The alley stretched on, puddles reflecting the ominous gray sky, and every shadow seemed to whisper caution. Yet she moved forward, each step heavier with responsibility than the last. The rain soaked through her clothes, chilled her to the bone, and blurred her vision, but her determination burned brighter than any discomfort. Suddenly, a sharp noise made her flinch. A cat darted from a pile of wet cardboard, knocking against the briefcase. Lila caught it just in time, heart racing. The storm seemed to mock her hesitation, urging her to act quickly, to move, to decide. Her thoughts flashed. What if
Dangerous comes looking? What if this briefcase isn't just money? What if it contains secrets that put me in danger? Fear pressed in from all sides, but she refused to let it dominate her. She ducked under a low-hanging awning, holding the briefcase close. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine what keeping it could mean. No more money worries, the bakery upgraded, bills paid, small dreams realized. The temptation was almost irresistible, a siren song in the middle of the storm. Yet every image was immediately replaced by another, sharper and heavier. The panic of the owner, the betrayal of trust, the loss of her own integrity. Her decision crystallized. She would return it. No hesitation, no compromise. The rain continued to fall in torrents, soaking her hair, running down her face, but she walked on. Every splash of water against the cobblestones echoed the weight of the responsibility she carried. Lila had faced many challenges in her life, but this was different. This was a test not of skill, not of strength, but of character. Every step brought her closer to an unknown future, a meeting she could not anticipate, and perhaps an opportunity she could not yet imagine. And so, as the storm raged around her, Lila clutched the briefcase with all her resolve, stepping forward into the darkened streets. The alley had given her more than just a discovery. It had offered a choice, and the choice, she knew, would define everything that followed. Somewhere out there, Alexander Sterling was waiting, unaware that a young baker in a rain-soaked alley was about to change both of their lives forever. The wind whipped through the narrow passageways, carrying the scent of wet earth and the faint aroma of bread from her basket. Every shadow seemed alive, every corner a mystery, but Lila pressed on, guided by an unshakable sense of right. The storm might have been fierce, the path uncertain, but she was resolved. She would do what was right, no matter the cost. And in that moment, with rain soaking through her clothes, hair plastered to her face, and the sleek black briefcase clutched tightly in her hands, Lila became more than just a baker. She became the embodiment of integrity, courage, and the quiet heroism that would soon change her life, and the life of the man who had lost everything he carried in that simple, unassuming briefcase. Lila stood in the narrow alley, rain dripping steadily from her hair and clothes, the sleek black briefcase pressed tightly against her chest. Every step she had taken to this point seemed to culminate in this precise moment. Her heart pounded with anticipation and uncertainty. The storm around her created a symphony of chaos, rain slapping against cobblestones, wind rattling the shutters of nearby buildings. But inside her mind, a storm of a different kind raged. She had found something extraordinary, something that could alter the course of her life forever. And yet, she had no idea whether to rejoice, hesitate, or run. Taking a deep breath, she gently set the briefcase on the wet ground. Her fingers trembled slightly as she unclasped the metal latch,
the cold metal biting into her skin. A soft click echoed faintly against the walls of the alley, and she slowly lifted the lid. What she saw made her inhale sharply. The interior was pristine and organized with meticulous care. Inside were stacks of crisp banknotes, neatly bundled with rubber bands, a small leather pouch containing gold coins, gleaming even in the dim light of the storm, and an assortment of documents and folders marked with embossed logos, signatures, and stamps. Leela's eyes lingered on a business card resting atop one of the stacks. The name Alexander Sterling gleamed in elegant gold lettering, accompanied by a corporate insignia she faintly recognized from the news and business journals. He was a billionaire, she realized immediately, someone whose life was so far removed from her own that the briefcase seemed almost surreal in her hands. She ran a hand over the cash, careful not to disturb the papers, feeling the smooth texture and the weight of possibility pressing down on her. The briefcase was more than money. It was power, influence, and responsibility, all bundled into one sleek, unassuming container. The first impulse that struck her was practicality. Her bakery was struggling, bills were overdue, the oven was failing, suppliers were patient but only to a point. The money in the briefcase could solve all of her problems, perhaps even allow her to expand the bakery and fulfill the dreams she had nurtured for years. The temptation was strong, almost irresistible. She could take it and no one would ever know. No one would ever discover her secret. The thought lingered in her mind, whispering promises of relief, freedom, and security. For the first time in months, she could imagine paying off her debts without fear, buying the ingredients she needed, and even improving the tiny bakery into something resembling her dream. But even as the temptation surged, another force pulled at her heart, a quieter, more insistent voice. Honesty, integrity. The lessons her mother had instilled in her since childhood pressed against her thoughts. Leela, her mother's voice echoed, soft yet firm. The world will test you, and in those moments, your choices will define who you are. Her conscience reminded her that this briefcase was not hers to claim. It belonged to someone who had worked hard to acquire it, someone who would be frantic, perhaps devastated at its loss. Taking it would betray not just the honor, but the values that had shaped her. Her fingers hovered over the cash again, and for a fleeting moment, she allowed herself to imagine life with it. She could pay the rent for the next 3 months without worry. She could buy a new oven, even hire an assistant to help with the early mornings. She could dress in warm clothes instead of the thin shawls she wore during the chill of winter. Her stomach tightened with desire and longing, yet her heart weighed heavier still, reminding her that desire alone could not dictate morality. Leela's eyes flicked to the gold coins in the leather pouch. They were beautiful, almost hypnotic, the way they caught the dim light of the storm. She imagined how easy it would be to slip them into her pocket, how no one would ever suspect a small-town baker of daring theft. And yet the thought left a bitter taste in her mouth. She knew that fleeting comfort would never replace the satisfaction of doing what was right. The storm around her seemed to pause, as if holding its breath in anticipation of her choice.
Her mind raced. What if the owner was desperate, searching frantically for this briefcase at that very moment? What if someone dangerous had lost it, someone who could take revenge if it were missing? The responsibility of holding it in her hands, even briefly, felt immense. She imagined Alexander Sterling pacing his penthouse office, papers scattered, a sense of panic rising as he realized his most valuable possessions were gone. The thought made her chest tighten, the urgency of her decision pressing down like the weight of the rain. And yet, doubt still lingered. She had worked hard for every penny she earned. Her life was filled with struggle and worry. Could one act of desperation truly be justified in the face of immediate need? Could taking the briefcase really harm anyone if she returned it later? These questions twisted in her mind, battling the simpler, purer instinct of honesty. Every answer she conjured in favor of taking it was met with a sharper, more insistent objection from her conscience. She closed her eyes, letting the rain wash over her face and hair, hoping for clarity. Her mother's lessons, the small acts of kindness she performed each day, the warmth she had nurtured in her community, all of it demanded that she choose integrity. Lila's hand lingered on the leather, feeling the cold and smooth surface, and she made a decision that would define her, not just today, but every day that followed. She could not, would not, take what was not hers. Instead, she took a deep breath and pressed her palm against the briefcase firmly, almost reverently, as though to seal her promise. She would return it. She would find Alexander Sterling and restore his property intact, no matter the difficulty. The decision did not eliminate fear, nor did it erase the temptation, but it brought a sense of clarity and resolve that steadied her shaking hands. Lila glanced around the dark alley once more, the shadows cast by flickering lamps creating shapes that seemed alive, almost judging her choice. She could feel the storm pressing in on every side, the rain turning the cobblestones into slick mirrors that reflected her resolve. Clutching the briefcase closer, she began to plan how she might locate its owner. The city was vast, and she only had a name and a business card to guide her, but she refused to let uncertainty deter her. As she stepped forward, the rain soaked through her clothes and plastered her hair to her face, yet Lila moved with purpose. The alley stretched ahead like a path toward the unknown. Each puddle reflected both the storm above and the storm within her own mind. She had faced challenges before, but this was different. This was a test not of skill or endurance, but of character, of courage, and of the ability to act rightly when temptation loomed largest. For the first time in her life, she realized that honesty was not always easy. It was not effortless. It demanded sacrifice, patience, and strength. But it also offered a reward that no amount of money could match: self-respect, peace of conscience, and the knowledge that she had chosen the right path. Lila's resolve solidified as she clutched the briefcase, and with a steadying breath, she began to plan her next move. Somewhere in the city, Alexander Sterling's life had been disrupted by the loss of this briefcase. Lila did not yet know him, but she understood that her choice, small in appearance but monumental in consequence, would shape the course of both their lives. She had the power to restore what had been lost, to right a wrong, and to prove to herself that integrity mattered more than immediate gain. With the briefcase held tightly, Lila stepped out of the alley, each footstep splashing in the rain-soaked streets, her mind a mixture of fear, hope, and determination. The storm had brought her here, into the heart of a moral dilemma, and it would carry her forward into a journey she could never have imagined. And though she could not yet see the outcome, she knew one thing with absolute certainty: she would do the right thing. The rain had not let up, and the streets of Willow Creek had transformed into rivers of reflection, mirroring the gray clouds and flickering streetlights above. Lila stood still for a long moment, the black briefcase clutched to her chest, and listened to the storm. Each raindrop that splashed against her face, each gust of wind that tugged at her soaked clothing, seemed to echo the conflict swirling inside her. The temptation was strong, nearly overwhelming, yet her heart was louder than her desire. She knew, deep down, what she had to do. The briefcase was a fortune in someone else's hands. The stacks of cash gleamed with possibility. The gold coins winked like promises of a life free from struggle, and the documents spoke of responsibility, wealth, and power far beyond her imagination. Lila's mind ran through every scenario in which she kept it. She could settle her debts immediately. She could pay off the bakery's overdue bills. She could purchase new ovens, expand her offerings, and even hire help to make mornings easier. The thought made her stomach flutter with excitement, and yet every mental calculation came with a shadow, the weight of dishonesty. Her conscience reminded her that this was not hers to claim. Her mother's words reverberated in her mind with the clarity of truth. The world will test you, Lila. Your choices in those moments define who you are. She had faced many challenges before, but never one that struck so deeply at the core of her character. This was not just about money or opportunity. It was about integrity. It was about proving to herself that no amount of temptation could outweigh what she knew to be right. Lila knelt beside the briefcase again, her fingers tracing the edges of the leather as though seeking guidance from the object itself. She imagined Alexander Sterling at that moment, somewhere in the city, realizing his property was missing. Panic, frustration, perhaps fear, these were feelings she could not ignore. The thought made her chest tighten. Every second she hesitated, another person, another consequence weighed on her conscience. She was holding more than money. She was holding someone else's trust, their livelihood, and their peace of mind. The storm around her intensified. Rain pelted the cobblestones in relentless sheets, wind howling like a chorus of warnings through the alley. Most people would have heard it home,
seeking warmth and shelter, but Lila remained rooted, contemplating the enormity of her choice. The briefcase was heavy in her hands, but not as heavy as the responsibility it carried. She imagined the headlines if she took it. Small-town baker steals billionaire's fortune. The thought alone sent shivers down her spine. She stood slowly, lifting the briefcase with renewed resolve. Her mind was clear now, stripped of hesitation and fear. She would not take the money, no matter how dire her circumstances. She would return it. She would do what was right. Because the alternative was a betrayal not just of someone else's trust, but of herself. Lila's feet splashed through puddles as she moved toward the street, the storm still raging around her, the wind tugging at the edges of her shawl. Every step felt heavy, yet purposeful, a symbol of her commitment to integrity. The decision was not without its doubts. Lila knew the city was vast, Alexander Sterling a man she had never met, and finding him would be a challenge in itself. How could a single baker in a rain-soaked town hope to locate a billionaire whose life moved at a pace far beyond hers? The questions pressed against her mind, but she refused to let fear dictate her actions. Courage, she realized, was not the absence of fear. It was moving forward despite it. Her thoughts drifted to the bakery, to the struggles that awaited her when she returned home. She would still face bills, still worry about suppliers, still wrestle with the limitations of her humble shop. But those problems, as daunting as they were, seemed smaller compared to the importance of doing what was right. Money could solve temporary problems, but integrity and character shaped a lifetime. And in that realization, Leela found a quiet strength she had never known before. The briefcase was heavy, yes, but it was a symbol of something greater, a test, a challenge, and an opportunity to prove herself. She tightened her grip, pressing it close against her chest as if drawing courage from its weight. Somewhere in the city, Alexander Sterling was waiting, unaware of the decision that had already been made for him by a young baker whose life had been defined by kindness and honesty long before this stormy evening. As she walked through the rain-soaked streets, Leela's mind worked through the practicalities. She would need to find an address, perhaps follow the clues in the documents, and maintain her composure when she finally encountered the owner. But even as the storm lashed against her, she felt a sense of clarity she had never experienced before. The path was uncertain, yes, but her direction was unwavering. She had chosen integrity over ease, morality over temptation, and courage over fear. Every raindrop that splashed against her face seemed to applaud her decision, or perhaps challenge her to remain steadfast. The alley had become a crucible, and Leela had emerged stronger, defined not by her struggles, but by her choices. The briefcase, once a symbol of temptation, was now a symbol of responsibility, and she carried it with pride rather than desire. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine Alexander Sterling's reaction. She could see the relief in his eyes, the gratitude, perhaps even a fleeting admiration for the person who had returned his property without hesitation. The thought warmed her, even amidst the cold rain, and reinforced her resolve. She was not acting out of expectation of reward, but out of principle. The storm around her raged on, yet inside, a quiet determination guided every step. Leela paused briefly at a crossroads, looking toward the city beyond. She had never walked these streets at night, not in this kind of weather, and yet she felt a sense of purpose she could not explain. The briefcase felt almost alive in her hands, as though it recognized the choice she had made and accepted it. She would find the owner, no matter how difficult, no matter uncertain the path. This was her moment, the turning point that would define her not as a struggling baker, but as someone capable of courage, honesty, and moral strength. As she moved forward, she reflected on her own life, the long mornings, the hard mornings, the small acts of kindness that had become her signature. Returning the briefcase was simply an extension of that character, a way to affirm everything she had always believed about right and wrong. The storm was merely a backdrop, dramatic and daunting, but it could not overshadow the choice she had made. In her mind, she repeated a mantra her mother had once said: "A person's worth is measured not by what they take, but by what they leave behind and what they protect." By the time she reached the end of the alley, Leela's resolve had solidified. The rain still poured, the streets glistened with water, and the night seemed endless, but she had a direction, a purpose, and a moral compass that would guide her through the uncertainty ahead. The briefcase was no longer just an object. It was a testament to integrity, courage, and the quiet power of doing the right thing when no one is watching. Somewhere beyond the storm, Alexander Sterling's life awaited, disrupted and incomplete, and Leela, a young baker from a small town, was stepping into a journey that would intertwine their fates forever. She could not know what the future held, but she knew one thing with certainty: she had chosen the right path. As the rain soaked through her clothes and ran down her face, she walked on, each step carrying not just the weight of the briefcase, but the weight of her choice, the affirmation of her character, and the quiet certainty that honesty and courage, above all else, would guide her forward. The rain had softened into a steady drizzle by the time Leela stepped out of the alley, her clothes plastered to her skin and her hair dripping onto her face. The briefcase, heavy and solid, rested against her side as she clutched it with both hands. She paused at the street corner, shivering slightly, and examined the contents again, hoping for a clue, a hint, anything that would guide her to its rightful owner. The storm had passed, but the city was alive with movement, people rushing home, the distant hum of cars, the glow of streetlights reflecting off wet asphalt.
Lila carefully pulled out the business card she had noticed earlier. Alexander Sterling, it read in bold, embossed letters, followed by a corporate logo that shimmered faintly under the streetlight. Below the name was an address, a downtown office building she had passed countless times, but never entered. The card also listed a phone number, but she hesitated before dialing. What would she say? How could she explain herself to a billionaire she had never met? Her fingers hovered over the keypad, heart racing. Finally, she shook her head, tucking the card back into the briefcase. Calling seemed too impersonal, too abrupt. She had to see him in person, to hand over the briefcase and ensure it was safe. The streets were slick and crowded, even at this late hour. Umbrellas bobbed above pedestrians, reflections of neon signs danced in the puddles, and the occasional honk of a car horn echoed through the narrow avenues. Lila navigated the crowd carefully, avoiding splashes from passing vehicles, and steering her path around the occasional puddle that threatened to soak her further. Every step felt deliberate, weighted by the responsibility she carried. This was no longer just a matter of returning a lost object. It was a test of her resolve, courage, and ability to act rightly under pressure. As she moved deeper into the city, she realized that finding a man like Alexander Sterling was far more challenging than she had imagined. The address on the card placed him in a large office building, one she had always assumed was off-limits to someone like her. People rushed past her, absorbed in their own lives, and she felt small amidst the towering glass and steel of downtown. Her heart pounded with anticipation and fear. What if she failed? What if the building was inaccessible? What if he was already gone? Each question tightened the knot in her stomach, but she pressed on. She paused briefly to ask a street vendor for directions, explaining in hurried, dampened words that she was looking for an office building near Main Street. The vendor, a middle-aged man with a kind face and a crooked umbrella, looked at her skeptically at first, but when she mentioned the name on the card, Alexander Sterling, his expression shifted. "Ah, Sterling," he said, nodding slowly. "Yeah, big shot, owns half the tech companies in the city. Office buildings just a few blocks ahead, top floors. Can't miss it. But lady, what business you have with him?" Lila's cheeks flushed. I found something that belongs to him," she said quietly. She didn't want to explain the details here, not to a stranger, but the vendor's curiosity was obvious. He gave her directions and a slight warning. "Be careful, lady. Book people don't always deal kindly with surprises." She thanked him and moved on, each step echoing against the wet pavement, the briefcase pressing against her side like a silent reminder of her mission. The building loomed ahead, glass and steel reflecting the remaining raindrops, its doors shining under the floodlights. Lila paused at the entrance, taking a deep breath to steady her nerves. The lobby was grand and modern, with marble floors and a receptionist behind a sleek desk. She approached cautiously, clutching the briefcase, and explained in simple, earnest words that she had found a lost item belonging to Alexander Sterling. The receptionist's eyebrows rose, but she nodded and picked up the phone, speaking quickly into it before gesturing toward a bank of elevators. "Go to the top floor," she said. "Mr. Sterling will see you." Lila's heart raced as she stepped into the elevator. The doors closed with a soft whoosh, and the confined space amplified her pounding heartbeat. Numbers lit up along the side of the elevator, counting her ascent to the top floor. She gripped the briefcase tightly, inhaling and exhaling to calm herself. This was it. The moment when her choice, her honesty, and her courage would all be tested. The elevator seemed to move in slow motion, each floor a reminder that soon she would meet the man whose life she was about to touch, whose trust she was about to honor. When the doors finally opened, she stepped into a sleek, modern office, the kind she had only ever seen from a distance in magazines or online articles. The space was immaculate, every surface gleaming, every corner polished. And there, behind a massive glass desk, sat Alexander Sterling himself. He looked up from his work, eyes widening slightly at the sight of a young woman standing in the doorway, soaked from the rain and clutching a briefcase that seemed far too important for her small frame. Lila swallowed hard, her throat dry, and took a tentative step forward. I believe this belongs to you," she said, her voice steady despite the nerves shaking through her body. She held out the briefcase carefully, as if it were made of glass. Alexander Sterling rose, his expression shifted from surprise to astonishment, and then to something almost unreadable, an admiration tempered by disbelief. He approached, taking the briefcase gently from her hands. You found this in the rain?" he asked, his voice a mixture of disbelief and gratitude. Lila nodded. "Yes, sir. I saw it lying in an alley. I couldn't keep it. I thought you should have it back." Her words were simple, unadorned, but they carried the weight of truth, honesty, and courage. Alexander Sterling studied her for a long moment, as if measuring her character against the expectations he had of the world. Then slowly he smiled, a genuine, unguarded smile that made Lila's heart lift despite the lingering nerves. "Most people would have walked away, or worse," he said quietly. "But you returned it. You didn't hesitate." His words were not just praise. They were recognition of her integrity, of the moral choice she had made despite temptation, fear, and uncertainty. The tension that had coiled so tightly in Lila's chest began to loosen. She had succeeded in finding him, in doing the right thing, and in surviving the anxiety of the search. But she also realized that the journey was far from over. This encounter, simple as it might seem, was the beginning of something larger. The briefcase had led her here, but her honesty had earned her a place in a story far greater than the immediate return of lost property. As Alexander Sterling held the briefcase, Lila observed the care with which he examined it. The documents, the cash, the coins,
All were intact, untouched, and safe. Her hands itched briefly.
A subtle reminder of the temptation she had resisted, but pride quickly replaced the fleeting desire. She had chosen the right path, and the world, for once, seemed to acknowledge that choice. And so, in that moment, the storm outside became almost irrelevant. The rain still pattered against the windows, but it no longer mirrored fear or uncertainty. It was a backdrop to honesty, integrity, and the courage to do what was right when no one was watching. Lila had navigated the streets, followed the clues, and found the owner. She had confronted the unknown with determination and moral clarity, and now the path forward, though still uncertain, was illuminated by her character. She realized then that finding the owner had not been the hardest part. The hardest part had been choosing to return the briefcase in the first place. Every step of her search, from the crowded streets to the towering office building, had tested her resolve, her courage, and her ability to remain true to herself. And she had passed, not by luck, but by the quiet strength of her heart. Lila's heart raced as she stepped into the polished high-rise office of Alexander Sterling. The city lights glimmered against the glass walls, reflecting off the sleek, modern furniture, while the faint hum of computers and distant traffic reminded her that she had entered a world far removed from the cozy streets of Willow Creek. Every instinct in her body screamed caution, yet she knew she had come this far and could not turn back. The black briefcase, heavy in her hands, seemed to weigh even more now, not because of its contents, but because of the responsibility she bore. Alexander Sterling rose from behind his massive glass desk, his tall figure casting a shadow across the room. His sharp eyes, accustomed to reading numbers, deals, and corporate strategies, now focused entirely on the young woman standing in the doorway. There was a flicker of disbelief in his gaze, quickly replaced by something that resembled astonishment, or perhaps even admiration. For a man who had likely seen every scheme imaginable, every form of deception and opportunism, he had encountered something he rarely expected: genuine honesty. Lila swallowed hard, her palms damp inside her sleeves from the rain. She could feel the tension in the air, as if every heartbeat echoed between them. Her mind raced with 1,000 questions. How would he react? Would he believe her? Would he think she was lying, or worse, trying to trick him? Her nerves tightened, but she reminded herself of the choice she had already made, the integrity path she had committed to. She lifted the briefcase slightly, offering it forward with both hands. I believe this belongs to you," she said, her voice trembling just slightly, though steady enough to convey sincerity. "I found it in an alley during the rain. I couldn't keep it. I thought you should have it back." Alexander Sterling's gaze softened as he studied her. There was a pause, long enough to stretch seconds into minutes, during which the weight of the moment hung between them. Then, slowly, he stepped forward, taking the briefcase carefully from her hands. His touch was deliberate, almost reverent, as if handling something sacred. "You found this and returned it?" he asked, voice a mixture of disbelief and awe. Lila nodded, a small smile breaking through her nerves. "Yes, sir. I knew it wasn't mine. I just thought it was the right thing to do." Her honesty seemed almost naive in the context of the sleek, high-powered office, but there was a confidence in her words, an unspoken pride in the integrity she had maintained despite fear and temptation. Alexander Sterling leaned back slightly, examining her with a careful, almost analytical gaze. He had faced countless challenges in his life: business negotiations, legal battles, investment deals. But this moment was different. It required no contracts, no signatures, no numbers on a spreadsheet. It required trust, moral clarity, and courage, qualities he had seldom seen in someone so young, so unassuming. A faint smile tugged at the corners of his lips, and he extended his hand. "You did the right thing," he said, his voice calm but filled with warmth. "Most people wouldn't have. They would have walked away or worse. But you returned it. No hesitation, no thought of reward, just honesty." Lila felt a warmth spread through her chest, a mixture of relief, pride, and awe. She had expected gratitude, perhaps a polite thank you, but this recognition was different. It was profound, affirming not just the action she had taken, but the values that had guided her entire life. She stepped forward cautiously and shook his hand, feeling the firmness of it, the subtle power of a man accustomed to commanding influence. Yet there was no arrogance in the gesture,
only acknowledgement and respect. I thank you, sir, she said softly. I just thought it was the right thing to do. She avoided his eyes for a moment, not out of shame, but out of the lingering intimidation she felt in the presence of someone so powerful. Everything about him, the office, his presence, the aura of authority, was overwhelming. And yet, in that moment, she realized that his admiration for her honesty leveled the playing field in a way nothing else could. Alexander Sterling smiled, a genuine expression that softened the stern lines of his face. Lila, he began, using her name for the first time, you remind me that integrity still exists in the world, that honesty can be found in the most unexpected places, and sometimes it comes from people we least expect. Your choice, it matters, not just to me, but to the world you're part of. That kind of courage doesn't come from wealth or education, it comes from character. Lila's eyes widened, and she felt a lump rise in her throat. His words were heavier than any sum of money she could have imagined. For years, she had worried about bills, survival, and the struggle to make her bakery a success. Yet here, in a single encounter, she realized
that the moral choices she had made every day, the kindness, the honesty, the small gestures, were what truly defined her. This was a recognition far greater than any financial reward could offer. Alexander Sterling leaned forward, his gaze unwavering. Tell me about yourself, Lila. How does someone like you live a life guided by such principles? His voice was curious, almost gentle, as if he genuinely wanted to understand her, the choices she had made, and the heart that guided them. Lila hesitated, collecting her thoughts. I guess I was raised to believe in doing the right thing, she said, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. My mother always said that the world will test you and that your choices define who you are. I've tried to live by that. I run a small bakery. It's not much, but I love what I do, and I try to help others when I can, even in small ways. Alexander Sterling nodded thoughtfully, clearly impressed. A bakery, huh? That explains the warmth I sensed in you before you even said a word. You've built something meaningful, even if it seems small compared to the world I know. That matters more than you realize. He paused, studying her as if committing every detail to memory. The determination in her eyes, the slight tremble of nervousness, the quiet strength beneath her unassuming exterior. Lila felt a mixture of humility and pride. She had expected gratitude, but not understanding, not acknowledgement, not the rare kind of recognition that touched the heart. She realized then that honesty and courage could forge connections, even across worlds, between someone from a small town and a man whose life operated on a scale she could barely comprehend. Alexander Sterling extended his hand again, not for the briefcase this time, but for her personally. Lila, thank you. Truly, you've reminded me that the most valuable things in life are not money or status, but the choices we make, the integrity we uphold. I won't forget this. Lila shook his hand firmly, a sense of warmth spreading through her despite the damp clothes and the stormy city outside. I'm just glad it got back to you, she said softly. I couldn't have done anything else. For a long moment, they stood there in silence, two lives connected by a single honest act. The office, the city, the storm outside, all faded into the background. What mattered was the human connection forged in a moment of integrity, courage, and moral clarity. Lila realized that this encounter, simple as it might seem, was monumental. It affirmed that the choices she had made every day, the small acts of honesty and kindness, were not insignificant. They shaped her life, her path, and in this instance, the life of someone far beyond her ordinary world. Alexander Sterling finally smiled again, this time with a sense of finality, as if he had reached a decision in his own mind. You're extraordinary, Lila. Don't ever forget that. The world needs more people like you. Lila nodded, words failing her. She could feel the weight of the briefcase less now, not because of its contents, but because of the recognition she had received. She had been tested, challenged, and ultimately validated. Her courage, honesty, and moral strength had carried her through the storm, both literal and metaphorical. And in that moment, she understood that the true reward was not in wealth or recognition, but in knowing she had done what was right. The office was quiet now, the storm having passed entirely, leaving the city glistening under the reflective glow of streetlights. Lila stood near the massive glass windows, still damp from the drizzle, holding her shawl around her shoulders as she processed the events that had unfolded. Alexander Sterling, the man whose fortune and influence could rival entire industries, sat across from her again, examining the briefcase that had brought them together. The air felt charged, but no longer with tension. Now it carried possibility, anticipation, and an unspoken promise. Alexander's gaze shifted from the briefcase to Lila, and a small, thoughtful smile appeared on his face. Lila, he began,
his voice steady but carrying a weight of sincerity. "What you did tonight was extraordinary. Most people would have ignored the situation, taken advantage, or walked away, but you returned what was not yours. You acted with honesty, courage, and integrity. That is rare." Lila bowed her head slightly, a mixture of humility and disbelief washing over her. I just knew it was the right thing to do," she said softly. "I've never had much, but I've always tried to do what's right." She looked up, meeting his eyes. There was no judgment in his gaze, only a quiet, measured admiration. Alexander leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers in thought. "Most people underestimate the value of integrity," he said, almost to himself. "They think life rewards cunning or opportunism, but real opportunity comes to those who act rightly. And you've proven that tonight." He paused, letting the words settle, and then leaned forward with renewed intensity. "I want to offer you more than gratitude. I want to give you a chance to take your life and your bakery to a level you may not have imagined possible." Lila blinked, unsure she had heard correctly. I don't understand, sir," she said, her voice trembling. "I'm just a baker. I work hard, but this is more than I could ever expect." Alexander smiled faintly. "Exactly. You work hard, you care, and you act with honesty. Those are qualities worth investing in. I want to mentor you, invest in your bakery, and offer a partnership that could transform it from a small-town shop into something much larger, something sustainable, something that carries your vision forward." Lila's mind raced. She had dreamed of growing her bakery, of reaching more people, of having a place that reflected her skill, care, and passion. But she had never imagined anyone of Alexander Sterling's stature would even notice her, let alone offer support. Her heart thumped.
Mixture of excitement and disbelief. She opened her mouth to speak, but words failed her for a moment. Alexander continued, sensing her hesitation. "This isn't about money alone," he explained. "Sure, investment can help, but what I'm offering is mentorship. I'll guide you, provide resources, and help you navigate the complexities of business growth. You'll have the tools to turn your hard work into lasting success. Your honesty and diligence have already earned my respect. I want to see where that can take you." Lila felt tears prick at her eyes. The weight of the briefcase, the rain, the entire evening's moral struggle, it all converged into this moment of possibility. She had acted rightly, guided by principle, and now that choice was opening doors she had never dared to imagine. It was almost surreal. I don't know what to say," she whispered. "I've worked hard, yes, but I've never had an opportunity like this, never." Alexander leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. "Then say yes," he said simply. "Say yes to mentorship, partnership, and the chance to expand your bakery. Say yes to a life where your dedication and honesty are recognized and rewarded. You've earned it." His gaze was unwavering, calm yet encouraging, and Lila felt a surge of determination in response. She had been honest when it mattered most, and now it was time to embrace the fruits of that courage, not as a reward for being opportunistic, but as a recognition of integrity. She nodded slowly, a smile breaking across her face. "Yes," she said firmly, I will accept. I'll work hard, and I'll do my best to make this opportunity meaningful." The word left her lips with conviction, carrying the weight of years of struggle, determination, and ethical resolution. She felt an unfamiliar yet comforting sense of empowerment. Her choices mattered, and they were opening doors she had never thought possible. Alexander smiled wider. "Good," he said, standing and extending his hand once more. "We'll start small, with guidance and support, and then expand when you're ready. But first, I want you to know something important. This isn't charity. This is a partnership. You bring your vision, your skill, your dedication, and I'll provide the resources to help it flourish. The success will be yours, built on your effort and integrity, not simply on my wealth." Lila shook his hand, feeling the firmness of his grip and the confidence in his eyes. The gesture felt symbolic, a bridge between two worlds, the modest life she had always known and the extraordinary possibilities that awaited. Her mind raced with ideas, plans, and aspirations. She could finally envision a future where her bakery grew beyond the small shop on Willow Creek, where her recipes, care, and skill could touch more people than ever before. For the first time in years, she felt hope that was tangible, real, and achievable. The storm outside, which had seemed so overwhelming just hours ago, now felt distant, almost insignificant compared to the opportunity unfolding before her. She realized that the real transformation had begun not with money or investment, but with the choice she had made to act rightly, to honor her conscience, and to face uncertainty with courage. Alexander gestured toward the briefcase. "And as for this," he said, "it will remain yours to manage. Consider it a symbolic beginning, proof that honesty and responsibility lead to real opportunity. You've handled it well tonight, and that same care will guide everything we do together." Lila felt a deep sense of gratitude, not just for the mentorship and investment, but for the validation of her values.
Her hard work, honesty, and courage had brought her here, and now they would serve as the foundation for a new chapter in her life. She realized that success was not just about money or opportunity, it was about character, choices, and integrity. She looked out over the city from the towering office, the lights twinkling like stars reflected on the rain-slick streets. For the first time, she imagined a future that was not just about survival, but about growth, fulfillment, and purpose. She had acted rightly, and in doing so had opened doors she had never thought possible. Alexander Sterling watched her, his expression thoughtful and approving. "Lila, you've reminded me why mentorship matters," he said. "It's not just about teaching skills. It's about recognizing potential, integrity, and character. And you, young baker, have shown me all of those in abundance. Let's make sure the world sees it too." Lila nodded, feeling a warmth spread through her chest, stronger than any storm or challenge she had ever faced. She realized that this moment was more than opportunity. It was affirmation that honesty, hard work, and courage always mattered. And as she stood there, clutching her briefcase, preparing to embrace mentorship and growth, she knew her life had changed forever. The morning sun streamed through the glass windows of Lila's first expanded bakery, casting warm light over freshly polished countertops and the gentle steam rising from ovens that had long been overdue for replacement. The aroma of warm bread, sweet pastries, and freshly brewed coffee filled the air, enveloping the space in a sense of comfort and satisfaction that mirrored Lila's own journey. It had been months since Alexander Sterling had offered mentorship, investment, and partnership, and the transformation was evident, not only in the bakery itself, but in Lila's life, her confidence, and her sense of purpose. Gone were the days of the cramped, modest shop where she had struggled to make ends meet. The humble wooden tables, the faded awning, and the squeaky floorboards had been replaced with modern decor, wide glass windows, and shelves neatly lined with artisanal breads and pastries. Every detail of the bakery reflected her dedication to quality and her love for her craft. Lila's eyes sparkled as she moved from table to counter, greeting customers and checking the status of the ovens. Despite the change in surroundings, she remained the same at heart, kind, attentive, and committed to treating everyone who walked through the door with respect and care.
Employees bustled around efficiently, each one trained under Lila's guidance and the mentorship she had received from Alexander. She had hired people from her community, some of whom had once been her neighbors, friends, or aspiring bakers with untapped potential. Lila moved among them with a quiet authority, offering encouragement, advice, and sometimes even just a smile or kind word that lifted their spirits. She remembered her own struggles, the long hours, the early mornings, the sense of isolation in her work, and she wanted her team to feel valued, empowered, and part of something larger. "Lila, the new batch of croissants is ready for the display," one employee called, and Lila nodded, stepping forward to inspect the golden pastries. She could see the care that had gone into each one, the delicate layers, the perfect browning. Pride swelled in her chest, not just for the product, but for the people who had helped create it. Each loaf of bread, each pastry, and each carefully arranged display was a testament to teamwork, dedication, and the vision that Lila had nurtured from her earliest days as a struggling baker. The transformation was not just visible in the physical space, but also in the community's response. Word of Lila's bakery had spread throughout Willow Creek and beyond, drawing in both local residents and visitors eager to taste the creations that had once been limited to a single small shop. Lines formed outside the bakery in the mornings, neighbors stopping to greet her, share stories, and express gratitude for the warmth and quality she brought to their daily lives. Despite the fame and success, Lila greeted everyone with the same gentle demeanor, the same willingness to listen and offer help that had defined her even before her fortunes changed. Her relationship with Alexander Sterling had also evolved. He continued to mentor her, offering advice on business strategy, marketing, and expansion. But more than that, he had become a friend and guide, recognizing the value of nurturing talent grounded in integrity and hard work. Lila often reflected on the night she had returned the briefcase, understanding now how that single act of honesty had led to opportunities that she could never have imagined. It was a reminder that character and morality were as important in business as skill and ambition, and sometimes even more so. Lila's expansion was deliberate and thoughtful. She opened a second bakery in a neighboring town, modeled after the success of the first, maintaining the same commitment to quality, aesthetics, and customer care. She ensured that every location upheld her values: fair treatment of employees, ethical sourcing of ingredients, and a welcoming atmosphere for everyone. Each new location brought its own challenges, from staffing to supply chain logistics, but Lila approached them with the same patience, diligence, and moral clarity that had guided her all along. The contrast between her past and present was striking. She remembered the cramped bakery where she had worried over every penny, where ovens had faltered and debts loomed large. The memory made her appreciate the progress even more, and it reinforced the importance of remaining grounded despite newfound success. Lila often visited the original shop, now refurbished and upgraded,
as a reminder of her roots, the humble beginnings that had shaped her work ethic and character. Customers who had supported her from the beginning were treated with special care, their loyalty acknowledged in personal ways, from handwritten notes to complimentary pastries, as a reflection of her gratitude. Even with her growing reputation, Leela never allowed herself to be consumed by ego or ambition. She remained humble, treating every customer with genuine warmth and every employee with fairness. She often stepped behind the counter herself, kneading dough, decorating cakes, and preparing coffee, delighting in the hands-on work that had first ignited her passion. It was a constant reminder that her success was not merely financial, but a combination of skill, dedication, and the values she had upheld even in the face of temptation. Community involvement became a central aspect of her bakery's philosophy. Leela organized baking workshops for children, sponsored local events, and provided support to neighboring businesses and aspiring bakers. Her vision extended beyond profit. It was about creating a network of care, inspiration, and opportunity. Each act reinforced her belief that success was not measured solely by money or fame, but by the positive impact one could have on others. Visitors often remarked on the atmosphere of the bakery. "It's more than just a place to buy bread," one customer said. "You feel welcome, appreciated, like everyone here matters." Leela smiled, remembering the countless nights she had dreamed of a place where her craft could touch lives in meaningful ways. That dream had grown into reality, yet it was anchored by the very same principles that had guided her during the stormy night when she returned the briefcase. At the center of it all, Leela felt a quiet sense of fulfillment. Her bakery had become more than a business. It was a symbol of growth, perseverance, and the rewards of integrity. The path from struggling baker to thriving entrepreneur had been shaped not only by mentorship and investment, but by her unwavering commitment to honesty, kindness, and hard work. She had faced moral tests, uncertainty, and fear, and had emerged stronger, more confident, and more capable of shaping her destiny. Looking around at the bustling bakery, the satisfied customers, and her hardworking staff, Leela realized that the journey was far from over. There were more locations to open, more recipes to perfect, and more lives to touch. But she also understood that the true foundation of her success was not the investments or partnerships, but the choices she had made along the way, the integrity, courage, and dedication that had guided her from the very beginning. In every loaf of bread, in every smile exchanged across the counter, Leela saw the reflection of her own journey. The old bakery, with its worn counters and leaky ovens, had been a stepping stone. The thriving business, the community impact, and the respect she had earned were the fruits of a life lived with purpose, honesty, and care. And in that reflection, she found something even more valuable than success, the knowledge that her character had remained intact, and that her choices had truly mattered. The sun dipped low over Willow Creek, painting the sky in hues of amber and gold, as Leela stood in the doorway of her flagship bakery, watching the community she had grown to love bustle around her. The streets were alive with people carrying warm breads, laughing children, and neighbors exchanging cheerful greetings. Everything seemed brighter now, from the polished windows of her bakery to the small details she had once overlooked. The flicker of a lamp in a shop across the street, the glint of sunlight on rain-dampened cobblestones, the scent of freshly baked goods carried on the evening breeze. It was a world that seemed unchanged in its essence, yet completely transformed in how she experienced it.
Leela's thoughts drifted back to the stormy evening when she had found the black briefcase in that dark alley. The memory of the rain, the weight of the briefcase in her arms, and the internal conflict she had faced felt almost surreal now. She remembered the surge of temptation, the rapid calculations of what could be, and the quiet voice of conscience that had guided her to do what was right. At the time, it had felt like a decision that could define her, but she could never have imagined how profoundly that choice would shape her future. As she reflected, Leela understood something essential. Life often presents moments that test the core of who we are. Opportunities and temptations may appear in many forms: money, power, recognition. But the true measure of a person is how they respond when no one is watching. In that alley, she had been invisible to the world, yet her choice resonated far beyond the moment. It had opened doors not because of luck, but because honesty, courage, and kindness are forces that always leave an impact. She smiled quietly as she remembered her meeting with Alexander Sterling. The memory of his initial disbelief, followed by admiration, gratitude, and encouragement, was vivid in her mind. That encounter had been more than a personal triumph. It had been a revelation. Success, she realized, was not about instant gratification or selfish gain. It was about aligning actions with values, making choices guided by integrity, and acting with courage even when the outcome was uncertain. That lesson, more than any sum of money or a business opportunity, had changed her life.
Her bakery, now a thriving hub of activity, was a living symbol of that principle. Each table, each display of pastries, each satisfied customer reflected the journey she had undertaken. The transformation from a struggling small shop to a successful chain was tangible, but more importantly, it was meaningful. Every employee, every neighbor who had become a regular patron, and every community member she supported was a reminder that ethical decisions, no matter how small they seem at the time, ripple outward in ways we often cannot predict. Leela's gaze traveled across the bustling room. Her employees worked efficiently, smiling and interacting with customers in ways that reflected both professionalism and genuine warmth. Children waved as they passed through the door, delighted by freshly baked cookies or a small sample of bread. Neighbors stopped to chat, leaving with laughter and gratitude that filled the air. In all of it, Leela saw evidence of a life built not on shortcuts, but on patience, diligence, and moral clarity. The reward she had received from Alexander Sterling, mentorship, investment, and partnership, was significant, yes, but it was inseparable from the honesty and courage she had demonstrated long before any money or opportunity arrived. She walked through the bakery, pausing to greet each employee, to offer encouragement, or to notice a detail in the workspace. Every corner told a story. The upgraded ovens represent persistence and investment in quality. The polished display shelves reflect pride and care. The joyful energy of the staff demonstrated the importance of respect and kindness. Leela understood now that success was holistic. It was about nurturing both business and people, integrity and craft, vision and community. The reflection continued as she looked out the window at the city lights. The alley where she had found the briefcase was far behind her, yet she knew that moment had been pivotal. It was not just a story of lost property or unexpected fortune. It was a story of character. She had faced a choice between temptation and honesty, and her decision was courageous not because it was easy, but because it had required her to act rightly despite fear, uncertainty, and desire. That courage had shaped her path, proving that morality and action are inseparable. As the evening progressed, Leela took a quiet moment for herself, stepping behind the counter to knead dough for a new batch of bread. The act was meditative, grounding her in the craft that had always defined her, and reminded her that the journey of integrity is ongoing. Every day, every decision, every interaction is a chance to reinforce who we are and what we value. She realized that the true wealth she now possessed was not measured in gold coins or cash, but in the trust she had built, the lives she had touched, and the integrity that guided her choices. The community around her continued to flourish alongside the bakery. Local families thrived, small businesses benefited from collaboration, and the ripple effect of her honest actions became apparent in ways she could never have anticipated. The story of the young baker who had returned a lost briefcase spread quietly, not as gossip, but as inspiration, a reminder that even small actions rooted in honesty can have profound consequences. Parents told their children about Leela's courage, aspiring bakers looked to her example, and neighbors marveled at how someone who began with so little could achieve so much while remaining true to herself. Even at the height of success, Leela remained grounded. She continued to wake early, to bake with care, to speak kindly to everyone, and to make decisions based on principle rather than opportunity. The lessons she had learned from that rainy evening never faded. Doing the right thing, showing courage, and practicing kindness were far more powerful than any temporary gain. And in living by those principles, she discovered a joy and fulfillment that no financial success alone could provide. As night fell over Willow Creek, Leela closed the bakery for the day, watching the warm glow of her shop spill onto the quiet streets. The reflection of lights and puddles reminded her of the first rainy evening when she had discovered the briefcase. The contrast was striking. Then she had been alone, uncertain, and weighed down by temptation. Now she was surrounded by community, thriving in her craft, and guided by the moral clarity that had always defined her. That journey, she realized, was the true story of success. Leela took a deep breath, feeling the cool night air fill her lungs. She understood that life would continue to test her in small and large ways, but the foundation she had built, the foundation of honesty, courage, and kindness, would guide her through any challenge. And as she turned off the lights and locked the door, she carried with her not just the achievements of a thriving bakery, but the quiet, enduring knowledge that doing the right thing matters far more than temporary gain. She whispered to herself, a mantra forged through struggle and triumph. Integrity is the path, and honesty is the reward. And in that moment, Leela smiled, knowing that the choices she made, both big and small, would continue to shape her life, her community, and the countless people touched by her actions.